Hi, I'm Kent. Let's see if I can get some clean holes in my pots. So if you've been following along on my channel, you know I've been working on this form here. This is kind of a moon jar style form, basically a sphere, and I made this with shape cast. I did some slight modifications to make a two-piece mold, and I have a video kind of showing how you can do that yourself if you want, although shape cast currently only supports one-part molds. Anyways, I wanted to make a lamp, so I put all these holes into the piece and fired it, and it winds up with a really cool effect. And I've been trying to get this rice grain effect where basically you get a glaze and put into the hole so it acts as little windows. So here's a test I did looking at trying to see the right glazes, and the glaze covers it. So here the body's unglazed, and I did another test where the body was glazed. That's all great, and I've tried a bunch of different ways to put the holes into the pots. So I've used a drill bit and I've used a punch, like this one here. The problem is pretty much no matter what I do, I wind up with getting blowout on the inside. So that's probably a bit out of focus, but hopefully you can see that all the pieces on the inside have been chipped out. And that's been happening pretty much regardless of the technique I've used to make the holes. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's my clay body. This is a very porcelain-like clay, and I don't think it's plastic enough to basically survive the holes being punched into them. I don't really want to change my clay body just yet. I know that's a deep rabbit hole I can get into. Instead, I've been trying to figure out if I can get a hole in a different way. So I tried drilling a bunch of holes and basically putting a pin. So this here's a nail, so it sticks through. And seeing if I can form the holes into the slip cast pot themselves, and then pull the nail out, and then leave the hole in a good state. The problem is this is very sensitive to how deep the nail was. On this video, several people commented around trying to put wax on the inside. And so I did that. This was just a very rough test, and it will make the clay thinner at this spot. Basically, it's inhibiting the deposition of the clay, but it doesn't actually leave a clean hole. As a side test, I went ahead and made this, which I dipped into the slip just to see what would happen. Some people thought that wax would resist the slip being deposited versus the nail that I was using. And to my surprise, that was actually true. I didn't think the slip would deposit on the nail, but here's the evidence it did. There's a very thin coat, and the problem is when this gets slid back out, all the slip that's on here basically closes up the hole. So back to here, when the nail's sticking out, that thin layer of slip, when it gets pulled back this way, winds up basically closing in the hole or creating a mound there. So basically defeats the purpose of putting the nail in there to create the hole in the first place. However, the wax worked well. Basically all the slip dripped off pretty much right away. And so the question is, can I go ahead and recreate that somehow, while also getting the size of holes that I want? So this test here where I tested the rice grain effect and glazes, I also tested a bunch of different sizes, and I wind up liking this size here. I think it's pretty good. This one was also okay, but I'm gonna go for this. That was made with this bunch here, and it turns out that's 3 millimeters. It's actually very similar to the original one that I did, so maybe I'm biased. So I went looking around for something that I could make 3 millimeter pins out of, and there are 3 millimeter pins made out of steel or something like that used for shells, and those were very expensive. And I wound up finding this. This is a piece of aluminum hobby wire, and what I want to do is basically cut it off into lengths and then use that for my pins. The problem is, I think probably much like the nail, I worry that the slip will be sticking to this, so I want to go ahead and coat these in wax and see if that will work as a resist. I also went and picked up a metric drill bit set because I didn't have one of those, and found the 3 millimeter bit, and it looks like these are basically the right size. It's really close, so I'm going to have to drill out a hole and make sure that the wire fits. So that's the other test I want to do. But first, let's make some pins. I want these long enough to be able to go through the plaster, and I'm thinking about my spear form, and that's basically 25 millimeters or an inch big. And so I want my pins to be longer than that. They need to be able to stick to the inside some, and then I want to be able to grab them on the outside. So I got an old pair of snips here. All right, there's a few. These are not exactly straight, so I might need to bend them. Luckily it's aluminum, so it bends relatively easily. And then the other thing I'm worried about is this little pointy bit here. So that's where I cut it off, and so it winds up being pointy, and while I can apply wax to the side, I worry about wax sticking here. So I'm going to cut this off again, because the other side is actually flat, and I think that's due to the cutters. One side winds up being flat and the other side's angled. And so I think if I can cut this again, like this, Yep, that squared it off just fine. Okay, so these will be the pins that we use. Next, I want to go ahead and coat these in wax. And I tried making candles a while ago using my ceramic pots, and so I still have some of the wax left over. There's a little bit down in here. Basically, this is what solidified after I was making the candle, so I think I want to go basically remelt this and then drop the pins in to the molten wax so I get a nice coating of that. So let me go ahead and start heating this up. And while that's happening, the other thing I want to do is go ahead and put holes into my mold as well. So here I have the holes that are the size of the nail. I think I'm basically just going to drill these out so that they're bigger and the size of the pin, and then I can actually see if the pin works. I know from the past, drilling into this will create a bunch of plaster dust, and I don't want to get my bench too messy, so I'll just go ahead and put a paper towel down and use these as pilot holes. All right, there we go. Those should be 3mm holes. And they go all the way to the inside. Let's see if these pieces of wire fit. So I just push it in. Yeah, it goes through. And it sticks in just like that. This one's a little bit more bent. Let's see how it goes. Yep, it still fits. All right, let me go deal with the wax and we'll be right back. Okay, so I've got a little bit of wax melted in here. I'm going to take one of my aluminum pins here and basically just drop it in. And move it around. Make sure it's nice and coated. Not the right tool, but it works. And pull it out. I'm just going to put it here on a piece of paper so I don't get wax on my bench. All right, let me go ahead and do a bunch more. And here we go. Here are a bunch of pins that I did. It didn't look like the wax was sticking, so while it was still just barely warm, I basically just rubbed my fingers around it and made sure the wax coating was over it all. I think the smooth aluminum is probably the wrong material to use this with, but it's the right diameter, so probably still some more work to be done there. So the next question is, do they fit with the wax on? And the answer is yes. I think the wax may also rub off over time. Probably the other problem. And I'm going to leave one as a control. I think it's always good when experimenting to have a baseline to make sure what we're doing is working. So this one here in the middle will be the control. Oh, the other thing it is, I went ahead and cleaned out all the plaster dust. We don't want that getting mixed in with the slip. If we can help it, a little bit should be okay though. All right, so I'm going to stick these in about yay far. That will be thicker than my slip. So there should be a little bit protruding through the clay body so that when I pull it out, we'll see if the wax is working or not. All right, let's go ahead and fill this up with slip. All right, I'll let that sit. It takes about half an hour to form the walls of my pot with my slip and my molds. And we'll come back and dump it out and pull the pins and see what happens. Okay, the wall has formed. So what I'm going to do is basically take this and dump it out in my bucket and let it drain for just a second. Then we'll pull out the pins and take a quick look, and then I'll let it drain the rest of the way. All right, there we go. I just drained it, and you can see some of the slip coming down. So I'm going to turn it back over and pull the pins out. I'll get some slip on my bench here. Now the hope is that the wax is preventing the slip from sticking. And here's the control. So I'm going to put this upside down and let it drain for another half an hour. That's basically how I deal with my pots. And we'll come back and take a look at it when it's time to pull out. Ready to demold. Take a razor here. Just go around the edge. Someone asked on a comment not too long ago if I worried about cutting into the plaster, and the answer was really no. This is a nice flat shelf. The other thing is if you mix your plaster properly, it's nice and hard, and I can dig in if I want to, but it would take some effort. So this goes into the reclaim. Oh, and I found something sharp works a lot better, especially with this clay. it can tear if it's not sharp. I used to use something like a plastic rib, and that worked. It cut through, but it would leave a jagged edge sometimes. There you go, comes straight out. So there we go, the holes from the outside, but from the inside, unfortunately we have these mounds here. So it would seem that the wax didn't do its job, and the middle control one seems basically the same as the others. For this form, it wouldn't be a big deal. I could actually clean it up from the inside. But again, my intended form is the sphere, and so getting down in here, my hand's too big, and I can't reach the bottom. So let's cut this open and give you a better view. Let's go ahead and slice this section out here. More reclaim. The nice thing about clay is it's basically infinitely recyclable at this point. All right, so here are the holes. So 2 of them look okay. They actually go all the way through. 3 of them do not. The control with no wax was actually this middle one here. So it seems like the wax didn't do what I wanted. These that went all the way through, I might be able to clean up from the outside. I might need to make a special tool or something to kind of reach through and clean that up. The others seem less promising. And the outside surface will need a little bit of cleaning, but I think that's relatively straightforward. So we're making some progress. At least now we're getting the right size holes, and the technique of putting the pins through the plaster worked. I was a little bit worried about the drill bit size and the wire size matching up, and that wasn't a problem. It seems like the wax on the wire isn't quite doing the right thing. I'm not too sure if that's the wire itself or my wax application. As I mentioned, it didn't quite stick how I wanted. So I might need to go and look for a different material to put the wax on, or find some other solution. As always, these things take a little bit longer than expected, but I think that's what happens when you're trying something new. That's okay, it's part of the learning process. I appreciate the comments as always. Some of the ideas in this video are directly inspired by them. So I'm not quite to the finish line yet, but in the meantime, if you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.